The layout helps me to define the positioning of the elements of the page. So there are many ways of doing it. You can forget about all of them and just learn grid. You will be in a much better position. All the ways are not very straightforward. You have a lot of tweaking to make your layout work. Now, because of that many years of learning and a lot of frameworks people learned from, the CSS people themselves, they put a very nice grid layout standard that is really powerful. And that's what I want to try to explain and demonstrate and go through during this session. So first of all, the grid gives me this two-dimensional layout. When I say two-dimensional, I have columns and rows. Basically, I have columns and rows. That's what a grid gives me. Then this is the first time we have such layouts built in CSS where we have grid, where we have rows and columns. And to use the grid system for layout, it's a two-step process. The first step is you define the grid. All this in CSS. And the second step is to place elements in the grid. So it's a two-step to use grid, define it, and then place elements. Let's just refocus. And basically the key idea here to keep in mind that the grid gives you two-dimensional space. And you can place elements in this space. That's basically the first idea we have to keep in mind. So let's start with an example. So let me just run this in Chrome, in Firefox. The reason I'm running it in Firefox because Firefox really has a built-in grid visualizer. You can see the grid within your HTML page. So now, let me just inspect this one. Here is the inspector. Okay, so all I have here, I have this container here. It's a div. And within it, I have many other elements. Can you see them? Many divs, 6 divs in fact. From A to F. Okay. Now, there is no styling defined for this container class. There is no styling yet. But there is a style for each of the divs. What this style is saying, what each div will have. The background color will be green-yellow. The radius is 5 pixels. You know, this radius, this little curve in here that you see here. And then the font is 150% bigger, which means 1.5 times the normal font size. And I have a padding of 20 pixels. Padding, which means space between the elements and the border, 20 pixels. So I have 20 pixels here, 20 pixels here. Yep. Okay. Now, out of the box, if you put this page like this, this is what you will get. This is what the browser will display to you. Now, what I want to do here, I want to display this in 3 columns, for example. I want to display this list in 3 columns. So one thing that comes to mind, I will go and use a table. We'll not use tables because this is not really a table. As I told you, table is if you have your transcript, maybe that is a table. Even that, you can use it. You can use grid layout. This is definitely not a table. So table, we should throw it away. Because a really table is not responsive. And I will explain what this means. It's not responsive. Once you define it, it's fixed. Now, responsive means the layout can change based on the size, the available space, space we have in the browser. So you can see here, I have a one-dimensional view. Now I want to make it as a grid, and I want to make it 3-column grid. So how I will do it? So what I will do, I will go to this element here, which is the container element, the root element in which we have this child. And then, let me just do it here. So what I'll create here, this container class. It's a CSS class. All I do, I will say here display, and the value will be grid. Okay, let me just refresh this guy. So far, no change whatsoever. But there is a grid. If I see here, if I click this little grid icon here, I am displaying that there is a grid. It has 1 column, and you can see here the lines. Can you see the lines? This is line 1, and this is line 2 of the grid. And this grid has how many rows? 6 rows. And the lines go from 1 to 7. This is the lines of the grid. Line 1, 2, 3, up to 7. These are the lines. Okay, now, this is still didn't help me to achieve what I want. So for me to make it really more interesting, I have to start defining columns of this grid. So for example, in this case, let's make it 2-column grid. So to make it 2-column grid, I can, very good, yes. So let me just increase this guy. So you can see here the nice visualization. I already created a grid of 2 columns. Now the number of rows is implicit. Implicit means the browser will work out how many rows. I can define the rows if I wish. But in a grid, there is something you can do explicitly, and there are other things you can let the browser do. In this case, I am defining the columns explicitly. What about the rows? They are implicitly defined. But if I wish, if I want to make it hard on myself, I can come here and say grid, template rows. And I can do the same. I can say here 100 pixels. This is my first row. This is my second row. Oh, comma, no comma. Yes, thank you. This is my second row. Can you see it? It draws as I go. And this is my third row. And this is my fourth, if I wish. Yeah, you can see the fourth row is empty. But here I am basically giving myself a hard time, and it's useless. I think it's a relative value as a percentage. You can divide the space equally among the 3 columns, if you wish. So you can make it as a percentage. That's another way of doing it. Better than having it an absolute. Okay. And what this really gives you, if I go back here and refresh, what really this gives you is that if I increase or decrease, basically the space for each column is percentage of the available space. But yeah, but the grid gives us even better syntax of doing this. So what I can do here, I can come and say each grid will be 1 fraction of the space, 1 FR, 1 FR, 1 FR. This is the best way of doing it. And let the browser work out the space to be given. 1 fraction of each, 1 fraction of the space. And this gives me a lot of flexibility. For example, I could give this one 1 FR, and the middle one is 2 FR. Which means the middle one will have 50% and the other one's 25% each, for example. This gives me a lot of flexibility. This is the recommended way of doing it. Oh, okay. Or you could, let me just show you this first. Sorry, I'll keep on jumping there. So let me refresh this. You can see here, this is 1 FR each, and the middle one is 2 FRs. You will find yourself many times, we might want to say, okay, give one column just exactly what it needs to fit the content in that column. And give the last column just exactly what it needs to fit its content. And the remaining, give it to the middle column, for example. You see here, this is very, very flexible. For example, you might have a menu there. You say, give the menu just enough space to fit the links of the menu. You might have a sidebar here that has some little, let's say, advertising or some text or whatever, some alert, whatever. Just give it enough space it needs, and then the remaining, give it to the middle, which is the main content of the page. So this is how you define your layout. Yes, please.
What is more recommended, to have a grid for the whole page or like divide it into small grids?
Very good point. So what you will do first, you will have one grid to define the overall layout of the page. For example, let's go to QU website. Super quickly. I don't think they are using grid. Yeah, but anyway, like just to, no, not this one. Yeah, okay, yeah. So here, what you might have, if you want to define this as a grid, as an example, If you want to define this as a grid. So what you will have a grid of many rows and columns. Yeah. So here, the first one will be a row, one row for the main menu. Can you see it there? This is one row. The second one, it will be another row. Maybe this one will have one FR and this one will have two FRs, for example. Or maybe this one FR, this one 3 FRs. So the second row is divided into 2 columns, one for the logo and one for the menu. The third row, what you will have in the third row, it has 1 column. The fourth row has 3 columns. The fifth row has 3 columns. And then you have another row that has 2 columns, and so on. So what I mean is you will have one grid that defines the overall layout. And then within each cell, you might have another grid or another flex box to define the layout of that cell. This is how it works. So you might have a grid within a grid. So because remember, what you can place in the grid is only the root elements. So what I mean here, so let me show you another example. I will come back to it, but let me just show it to you. Here is the page layout using areas. Yeah. So here is the header. This is the layout. So I have a header that occupies 2 columns. I have a navigation bar that occupies 2 rows, the main and the footer. Now, what I am placing in the grid, I am placing the root elements, the header, the navigation, the main, the footer. Now, within these elements, I might have within them define another grid to define how the layout of that particular part of the page is organized. So that it's basically nested grids. Or you might have a grid, within it there is a flex box. That I will explain shortly, what flex box is. But with the grid you can do a lot. You can organize your page nicely. But this is a very, very good question. I want to add one more property here, which is the grid gap. Just because those don't have any gap between them, I just want to put some gap there of 10 pixels, just for them to be distinct. Okay, so in here, it did implicitly. Implicitly, it placed all the elements according to their order, to the order in which they appear in the source code. So it has A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on. What if I want to have F as in the first cell? Then you have to do explicit placement. Yeah? So let me show you an example of explicit placement. Of course, if you can achieve what you want to achieve using implicit, of course, do implicit. But if what you want to achieve cannot be achieved implicitly, then you have to become explicit. Okay, so let me show you here placement using manual placement, using explicit placement. Here is the explicit placement. Take a look. You see here, D took the first cell, and then followed by A, followed by F, and so on. So here, it's not an implicit placement, because I wanted to place them myself. So how do I do explicit placement? So here it is. So if I go to inspect. Okay, first let me go here. Here's my grid. You can already see here is my grid. These are the cells of my grid. Now, here is my A. A is placed where? Which column? Second column. First row. So here is how I defined it. So I gave my div a class. What is the class I gave it? What's the name of the class? A. And then in that class, I went ahead and say, oh, I want this element to be placed in column 2, row 1. What about C? How C made it here?
Row 2, column 3.
Row 2, column 3. That's it. Here is it. Grid column 3, grid row 2. So you can do, if you wish, you can do explicit placement using grid row and grid column. Very straightforward. This is one way of doing it. Once you start doing this, if you wish, you also have the flexibility to span them to multiple rows and multiple columns if you wish. You see here, the first cell is spanning 2 columns, and the last cell, B, is spanning 2 rows. You can do that if you wish. So take a look at this, how I do it. If I go inspect again, and I go to my A, you can see there I asked A, go to column 1 and span 2. Can you see it? What about B? If I go to B, I said go to column 3, this is column 3, and go to row 1 and span 2. And it does it. So you can span, if you wish, multiple columns. Again, this is really theoretical. Like there is much better way of the placement. But just be aware that this is like kind of a naive way. If you want to go to this level, you can do it, of course. Not really a table. No, I will show you why this is not a table. Of course, so far, it's not responsive. I have to do some effort to make it responsive. Yeah, this is not responsive yet. I will make it responsive later. But if I use table, I am locked. I cannot make it responsive. Table is not responsive. Plus, I am separating the content from the presentation. So the content of my page is in HTML. The layout of my page is in CSS. So this is another power of grid. But if I use it in table is within the HTML. If my intention is to use table to layout, first of all, it's the wrong approach. Second, I will be mixing the content with the presentation. And here they are totally separate, and I can change them the way I wish without upsetting the content. Content separate, presentation is separate. Okay, let's move on. So we have seen how we can place elements explicitly in the grid, using grid row and grid column. And while doing that, we can span multiple columns and multiple rows. So far it's clear? This is not the best way of placing elements in the grid. Just be aware of it. There is a better way of placing elements in the grid. The better way of placing elements in the grid, let me just give you this example. So what I'll do here, I come to my grid, and basically instead of defining rows and columns, I define areas. So what areas means, I will have here, basically my grid will have 6 areas. Head, nav, main, nav, foot. These strings I put here, you can name them the way you wish. You can give them meaningful name. You can say, in the first row of my grid will be the head. In second row, one part will be navigation, one part will be main, and the last row will be navigation and foot. So what you do, you define your areas. And then what you do after you define your grid, you go ahead and place elements in these areas. Okay, so what I'm doing here, I'll go to my header, the header element, and say, what is the grid area of header? I want it to be placed in the area named head. And the navigation, I wanted to place it in a grid area named nav. And the main, and so on. That's it. This is the best way of placing elements in the grid. You define areas, you give them names, meaningful names, and then you go to your elements and say, the grid area of this element is whatever name I have defined in my grid. And then it will nicely do the placement. So let me run it, and then I will explain it further if needed. So let me inspect. Here is inspect here. Okay, so first of all, let us define here. Can you see when I do this? That's why Firefox is very nice in terms of learning about the grid and debugging the grid. So when I say, show me the grid, how it is laid out on my browser, you can see the areas and the name of the areas. Can you see here the name of each area? I have head, nav, main, nav, foot. And then each element each element, I'll go ahead and say which area this element should be placed in. So in this case, the header area will be placed in these two cells that are named head. And the nav, can you see the nav? The navigation will be placed in this area called nav. By the way, you can name them the way you wish. These are just names. Of course, keep them meaningful. And basically, the browser will know what to do. It will take this element navigation and it will place it in these two cells that are named nav. And finally, you see the footer. If I go to the footer here, it is placed in the area named foot, and it will be placed there. Okay? So if you really want, basically, this is the idea. If the implicit layout, if the implicit placement is enough for you, which in many cases it's not enough, then you can just go ahead and don't do any placement. Let the grid do the placement by itself. The browser will do the placement by itself. Now, if you really want to do explicit placement, what is the best way of doing it? Using grid areas. You go to the grid, you define your areas, give them a name, and then you go to your elements and you say, this element will go to this area by using the grid dash area, and you give the name of that area. Yes? So let's say if I want to make this, just do a small change, just for you to get the idea. I wanted to make it a 3-column. Let's say I want to make it a 3-column layout. So I go ahead and say here head. So the head will occupy the first row. And here, let's say I'll have a sidebar. Side. Yes.
I have a question. Didn't we say we should never use some style inside the HTML page?
No, this is just for demonstration. Yes, you're absolutely right. This is for demonstration. I want to keep them together. But I told you last time. Maybe you weren't here. This is for demo. It's fine. Yeah. Okay. So what I'm adding is I'm adding this sidebar. Yes. So I might have here. I can come here, and I can put it wherever I wish. Here is a sidebar. Okay. All I do, I go to this element page, and the aside within this page element, and I want the grid area to be, to be basically a side. So what did we call it? Sidebar? Yeah. What did I call it up there? Sidebar. I called it sidebar. So this is the area this side will be placed in. And then just to make it clear, the background color will be this. Okay. So here is my 3-column layout. And you can see here the sidebar there. And then this occupying the rest. So that's basically how you do it. So you create your areas in the grid definition, and the areas have names, and then the elements you go and place them by assigning a property in the CSS. You assign the property grid area to one of the areas you have defined in the grid definition. You can see here this is a 3-column. Regardless, even if it is small, it stays 3-column. This is not really responsive. Especially if I have a lot of content in there, it might start being squashed. Okay, so what we mean by responsive?
Between
flexible and each screen size.
Yes, like basically the layout should change based on the available screen. Because we are accessing our website using different devices. So when I'm accessing the website using my laptop, I have so much screen. If I'm putting it on my TV, much more screen size than if I'm using my phone. So in here, the layout in the phone, it could be just one column instead of having 3. So I want this layout to change based on what? The screen size. So if you make your layout and the page layout changes based on the screen size, what are you doing? You are doing responsive web design. This is very important. Now it is a must. It's not like something luxury. So we've seen this. I'm not sure if QU already has a responsive design. I think so. Yeah, so if I go there, you can see here if I change the size, can you see before it was 3? Let me just go up. See here how many columns I have here? 3 columns. As I change, if I go down, became 2 columns. Yeah, because of the screen size. Maybe this is like, let's say, an iPad, for example. If I change it to a mobile, for example, became 1 column. This is responsive. Yes? So how to achieve this responsiveness? So the grid will be our friend. So what you do is you first do it for mobile design first. So for mobile device, it will be 1FR. You define your page as if it will be displayed on a mobile device first. So let's go back there. If I do 1FR, let me just close this. Yeah. Here's my 1FR. On the mobile device, it will display like this. And then I can say, if I have more space, then I have another layout. So first idea is, this is a recommended one. You design it for mobile first, and then you say, oh, what other layout I will get when I have the opportunity of much larger space. And to do that, basically, I will go ahead and ask their browser, do you have more space? Do you have this minimum space, let's say 700 pixels? If yes, make it 3 columns. If you have if you have 600 pixels, make it 2 columns. If you have 900 pixels, make it 3. If you have more than 1,200 pixels, make it 4 columns. Yeah. So basically, I am asking the browser what is the available screen width that I have at hand, and then based on that, I change the layout of my grid. And to do that very easily in CSS is you use what is known as media query. So all you do, you put this at media, and here I am targeting the screen. You could have a media for print, you could have it for TV, but most likely we just focus now on the screen. And I'll say here, if I am displaying this page on the screen, it's not for print, then, and if I have 700 pixels available, minimum 700, I want to make it 3 columns. So what happens is,
you need every column?
Sorry?
If R is 1
Yes,
column.
1 column, yes. As we discussed before, every FR is 1 column. So now, if I refresh this, so far, take a look at this. What is the width available? 480. I'll keep growing it. It's 500, 600, still 1 column. 660, 709. That's it, 3 columns. That's what really responsive layout is. Very, very simple. All I do, little media, what we call a media query, at media screen, and what is the minimum width, and then I change the layout based on that. So I can have multiple layouts. So let's do another one.
What about if you change the style, and instead of grid, you just change it to block?
No, grid. What is the layout we will be using from now on? Grid. Throw all other stuff. You can safely throw it. Don't even learn it. If you want to do layout, what you will learn? Grid and nothing else. It's more than enough. Yes, please.
So, Doctor, are we overriding the previous initialized style, or
Yes.
are we creating a new one?
No, you are basically extending the style.
Extending that.
Yes, you can see here. This is a very good question. Exact same class. Can you see here? Exact same class. When I define it, the default definition, what is the default definition? Mobile first. Then I start doing like custom definitions based on the media query values. So let's make it a little bit more interesting. So for example here, up to 600 pixels, if I have 600 pixels and above, I'll make it 2-column layout. Yeah. Now above that, from let's say from 900 pixels and above, I will make it 3 columns. That's how I do it. Simple media queries. So I'll go back and refresh this. 2 columns because the size is 700. So keep increasing. You can see here the size is 913, became 3 columns. This is really what responsive layout means. And the way you do it is grid. Don't forget about all other ways, just the grid. And Bootstrap, throw it away, khalas. Because Bootstrap, the reason why Bootstrap was very popular, because of this. It gives you this responsive layout. Before the grid, it was much, much harder to achieve this. With the grid, it's so easy. We don't need any other frameworks. Thank you, Bootstrap, khalas, Bootstrap is gone. Only Bootstrap now, it has some useful classes. If you wish, some lazy web developer, they have some built-in classes you want to bring them, maybe to style a table or to style some menu, it's fine. But don't use Bootstrap for defining the layout. Use grid to define the layout. Okay, I want to show you one more very, very powerful feature of the grid. It can give you a responsive layout without even media queries. So one way to achieve a responsive design is to use media queries coupled with the grid. Another way of achieving it, in some cases, it's not flexible. You cannot do it for all cases. But in some cases, you can do it with the grid alone, without any other thing. In fact, with one line of code. It gives you so powerful grid layout that is flexible and responsive. Okay, so let me show you this one. Here it is. So here, I run it. Here. So you can see here, this is for when I have small screen, bigger, bigger, bigger. Responsive layout and flexible layout. Yeah. The browser works out how many columns, and the browser works out the width of each column. It works out how many rows and all this stuff. Okay, automatically. Yeah. There's another example here. I'll show you quickly how this is achieved. Another example. Which brings me to your question. Like in here, I have one grid that defines the general layout, and for each of these boxes, it has its own layout. Yeah, so it's a multi-layout. So, and you can see here, this responsiveness is achieved through the grid. By the way, this is without any media queries. Just one line of code. That's why grid is really, really achieved the perfect way of doing layout with very little effort. And it beats all other frameworks that are out there. And it's built in. The good thing, it is built in CSS. No extra library is needed. It's just there. So let me show you what is powering this flexible layout. And basically, this line of code. Super simple. We can just... Okay. So all I'm doing, I'm saying make this main. Just let me show you the main, how it looks like. This is the main. It's a tag, you know, the main tag. And then within it, I have many images. Nothing else. That's all. There's nothing else. There's a footer. This is from where this is coming from. This example, I adopted it from this example. And it was done by this CSS expert, Jen Siemens. So good. She's expert in CSS. She works for Mozilla Firefox. And she has so many examples, so many videos and talks. I highly recommended to watch some of her videos. Okay, so basically here is the idea. All I am doing here, I am telling the browser, I want you to work out how many columns I will need. I want you to work out how many columns I will need based on the available space. So go ahead and auto fit for me, work out how many columns I will need. And I want every column to be minimum of 280 pixels, and the maximum is 1 FR. What this means is, if you have 280 columns, if you have 280 pixels width in the browser, make it 1 column. Now, if you have, let's say, 300, keep it 1 column. If you have 350, let's say if you have 400, keep it 1 column, but give the column the whole width. Now, as soon as I have 2 times 280, which is 560, what the browser will do, it will make it 2 columns. Now, if I have, let's say, 600, it will stay 2 columns. And what is the width of each column? 300, half, 1 FR each. Now, as soon as it becomes 280 times 3, it will make it 3 columns. So without any media query, without anything, so all I'm saying, repeat auto-fit. Auto-fit means create as many columns as you could. Now, how do you create these columns? Minimum 280 and maximum 1 FR. What this means, if you have 280, create 1 column. If you have more than 280, but less than 2 times 280, keep it 1 column. As soon as it crosses the double, make it 2 columns. So what I want to say, let me show you this live. What is the width of the grid? 656. Now, how many columns I can fit? How many 280s I can fit in here? 2. So it will say I will have 2 columns, but will each column will be 280? No, it will be 1 FR, which basically, like in this case, divide the space equally among the columns. So as soon as this one becomes, let's say, 280 times 3, above 840. So what will happen? This will allow us to have 3 columns. But each column, if I click on one of the columns, the width is 292. It's not 280. And how did we achieve this 292 instead of 280? By using the 1 FR. So that's basically, this very, very powerful. Do I have here any media query? No media query, nothing. That's it, only this line.